What's up, everybody, and welcome back to BIONICLE Autopsy, the show where we cut through Bionicle piece by piece. And speaking of peace, I've had quite a lot of peace these past few months thinking about the next Bionicle Autopsy video I would make. And I know, I've been gone for some time, but let's be real here, this fandom's pretty used to waiting. But that's okay, because I know you've missed me during my absence, which only marginally increases the already inflated ego that I currently possess, but we're not here to talk about me. No, we're here to talk about time. Time was a pretty important factor when it came to Bionicle, both for Gen 1 and for Gen 2. The Bionicle 2015 animations have shown us that time appears to be sort of a central focus for the new line, with the inclusion of the Temple of Time, which brings forth the timeless heroes, and we can't really forget the Mask of Time being splattered all over the place. Despite the emphasis on time, it's not really clear what the connection between the Toa and time is, but it appears as though these are beings that exist independent of time, ready to be called down whenever they're needed. So why then would the Toa forget who they are upon arrival? We're left to assume that the Toa exists in a separate plane of reality where time has no effect on them. Within context of the animations, we know that there's a prophecy that foretells of the Toa's arrival. The narrator makes it seem as though the prophecy originates from Akimu during his fight with Makuta, but the weird thing is the prophecy seems to be fairly old. Well, considering the fact that Akimu currently rests within inside the ancient city, and, well, the fact that it's called the ancient city, it's safe to assume that there's been a significant amount of time that's transpired in between the battle with Makuta and the current events that are happening in the animations. But this would imply that there is an event separate from the current Skull Spider invasion that caused the villagers to leave their home in the ancient city and form their respective villages in the regions of Akoto. Unless, of course, the Skull Spider invasion is the event that caused them to leave. But we've seen what the ancient city looks like in the recent Bionicle animations, and they don't really appear to be recently abandoned. So the villagers would have had to have left, formed their villages, and lived there for quite some time before calling upon the Toa. But if that's the case, they've lived on their own for some time now, so why call upon the Toa? What's changed? What would the Skull Spiders hope to achieve by attacking the ancient city? Well, we're not really sure how sentient the Skull Spiders actually are, whether they're capable of independent thought, or if they're just mindless drones being controlled by the Lord of Skull Spiders. What we do know is that Lost can control the Skull Spiders from the Golden Mask, but what's weird is that Lost doesn't really appear to be a Skull Spider himself. He looks like a completely different species. And the fact that he has to use the mask to control the spiders makes it seem like he has no relation to the spiders at all. He's merely using them as his pawns. Ironically, the Skull Spiders themselves actually resemble the skull-themed villains that we're going to be getting later this summer. The same skull-themed villains that are currently resting inside the ancient city, of which Lost doesn't appear to have any connection with whatsoever. And even in the animations, his appearance is sort of random. He's kind of just there. So then what is his relationship with the Skull Spiders, and what exactly is his purpose? Well, let's back up to our two scenarios real quick. On one hand, we've got the ancient city, just after the battle between Akimu and Makuta. The Skull Spiders attack, forcing the villagers to leave Akimu and the ancient city behind. The villagers then created their own villages in the regions of Akoto and lived in relative peace until the Skull Spiders attacked again, forcing them to call the Toa to help. But then we have the ancient city just after the battle between Akimu and Makuta, and an unknown event happens that causes the villagers to leave, form their respective villages, and then the Skull Spiders attack, causing them to summon the Toa. In both scenarios, Lost is likely the person behind the attacks that lead to the summoning of the Toa. However, his involvement with the first attack seems to be rather questionable. He doesn't really seem to have much relation to the Skull Spiders or the Skull Villains resting inside the ancient city, and his placement on the bridge to the ancient city felt pretty random. All we know is that Lost can control the Skull Spiders from the Golden Mask, but one has to wonder how he obtained this mask. Because the animations imply that Akimu and Makuta were the ones who created all the masks. So it's weird that a giant spider would be in possession of one, unless it didn't belong to him in the first place. What this all boils down to is that Lost isn't our true enemy. Someone else is pulling the strings. So let's look at the only other confirmed villains we have right now, the Skull Villains currently resting inside the ancient city. The weird thing about these guys is that they appear to be the equivalent of zombies. They're not fully built, they rise from the ground, and it appears as though they're rotting away. But one has to wonder where these creatures came from and what could possibly be their origin. The thing is, we know that there was peace before the battle between Makuta and Akimu, so it's unlikely that these creatures existed prior to that event, meaning their origins are directly connected to Makuta himself. Which means, given their aesthetic similarities, the skull spiders are also tied to Makuta. We know that Akimu was put into a lifeless state after knocking the Mask of Ultimate Power off Makuta's face, but we don't know what happens to Makuta himself. The animations show the protectors discovering the body of Akimu, but Makuta's nowhere to be seen, which either means that he was destroyed during the removal of the Mask of Ultimate Power, which is pretty unlikely, or he moved himself. Now, one could argue that the explosion launched Makuta's body away, but if that's the case, why didn't the same happen to Akimu? Plus, the fact that this is, well, Makuta kind of implies that he's our main villain. So let's play out the scenario. Makuta is fighting Akimu, and Akimu successfully knocks the Mask of Ultimate Power off Makuta's face, causing an explosion. The explosion was strong enough to send Akimu into a lifeless, comatose state, but we're not really sure what happened to Makuta, only that he was separated from the Mask of Ultimate Power. But assuming the explosion had a similar effect on Makuta, it's likely that he's in a weakened state, if not comatose himself. And given the fact that he's now been separated from the Mask of Ultimate Power, and assuming that the Mask of Ultimate Power wasn't destroyed in the explosion, we now have a weakened Makuta alone and on the brink of insanity due to the effects of the Mask of Ultimate Power. So this is a guy who, due to the jealousy of his brother, created a source of ultimate power, which then in turn caused him to go insane. The fact that he's been separated from this power means that he'll probably try and get that power back. And given the nature of how the skull spiders operate, via being controlled by a singular mask, it's safe to assume that the origin of the skull spiders is Makuta himself. This places him at the first attack that caused the villagers to leave the ancient city and abandon Akimu's body. Now, why Makuta would attack the ancient city is unclear. Perhaps it was an attempt to get the Mask of Creation from Akimu. But we also know the Mask of Creation is missing as well, given the fact that his body is maskless and replaced with a golden protector mask. Perhaps Makuta didn't realize this and attacked the city expecting to find it, but given the fact that Makuta was around Akimu's maskless body, he should be well aware of that fact. And if the mask wasn't lost in the explosion, then Makuta is likely already in possession of it, which means Makuta's goal for attacking the ancient city likely wasn't to find the Mask of Creation. Our best bet is that Makuta likely attacked the ancient city hoping to retrieve the Mask of Control, which he likely left there after replacing it for the Mask of Ultimate Power. But we're not really sure what Makuta did with the Mask of Control, and the animations make the implication that it is also lost with the Mask of Creation and the Mask of Ultimate Power. So if this is the case, we really don't have a motive for Makuta to attack the ancient city, and we also don't know how he could do it to begin with without the Mask of Ultimate Power or the Mask of Control. But wait a minute, we do know how Makuta could attack the ancient city, because this version of Makuta happens to be a mask maker. So let's just say that, hypothetically speaking, Makuta could, I don't know, create a mask that could control a giant army of spiders? Surely it would be in his power to do so, which explains how the Makuta could attack the ancient city, as well as where the skull spiders and the skull villains originate from. But we still don't really know why. It almost seems like whenever we get close to answering a question, more questions seem to spring up. But I guess that is the nature of a new line. But wait a minute. This isn't a new line. The funny thing about time is that time gives us perspective on things. Sometimes it's hard to find an answer when you're living in the moment. For example, for many kids, school is their life, and it's hard to imagine a life outside of school because they haven't had a chance to live beyond their current situation. But adults are a bit different because they already have these experiences, and they can look back, reflect, and learn from their past mistakes. But I'm sure a lot of people would just love to go back in time and fix a few of those mistakes. And this puts us at an interesting situation, because BIONICLE is now an adult, going back in time to rewrite their childhood. So, perhaps to find the answers that we're looking for, we merely need to step back in time. In particular, the year 2003 when the direct-video movie BIONICLE Mask of Light was released. Now this is interesting because this is the first movie that we received out of the 4 films during BIONICLE's original run. And as the first film, there were a lot of concepts and ideas that went into the movie that didn't quite make it to the final product. For example, Mask of Light was originally intended to be a direct-to-video prequel film for a theatrical BIONICLE film that would come out the next year. Obviously, this didn't exactly pan out, as the sequel, Legends of Metru Nui, ended up becoming a direct-to-DVD movie as well. But what this tells us is that LEGO had a lot of ambition for these movies. So perhaps that might explain some of the oddities of Mask of Light. Have you ever watched the movie and noticed that there are a few weird scenes that don't really make any sense or lead to anything? In particular, the Makuta's motives throughout the film are a little confusing. He says some things that kind of go against what we've been told about the Makuta thus far.
The earth shudders, my brother. The seventh Toa has begun its approach. Again, the prophecies of the Matoran oppose my will. Must I release those who should never see the light of day?
It's easy to just see this as evil rambling, something that a typical villain would say, but there's a few things that you could take out of this dialogue that are pretty interesting. For one, we know that Makuta isn't actually Matanui's brother, and we know that his motive is simply to take over Matanui's body and become the new overlord. So why would Makuta himself refer to Matanui as his brother? I mean, I guess you could argue that Makuta sees himself on the same level as Matanui, and for that reason he would call him his brother, but the term brother is usually associated with a level of respect, and considering the Makuta that we know is really just using Matanui as a means to an end, it's hard to see him considering Matanui a brother. And another weird thing is that he almost sounds remorseful for releasing the Rakshi. He refers to them as creatures that shouldn't see the light of day, and he questions whether he should release them or not. Almost as if he's wary about the destruction they could cause, but why would he care? He's evil and all he wants is power, right?
I must preserve your slumber. Their unity can be poisoned. Their duty will be broken. Their destiny I must shatter. Go, my sons, use the shadows, and keep my brother asleep.
At first, this dialogue sounds like typical evil villain talk, but after the Rakshi are defeated, Makuta attempts to start a dialogue with Takua, offering to spare Jala and his village so long as Takua delivers the Mask of Light to him. Obviously, Takua refuses, and in response, Makuta decides to release 3 more Rakshi. But there's something noticeably different about this.
My goodwill refused. My noble sons bound in ice. So my hand is cast. Now I must pierce that which the Toa hold dear. Anger amongst them will threaten their precious unity. Hunger will consume their duty. And fear will keep them from their destiny. They will not disturb you.
This scene is a lot more sinister, and Makuta is noticeably upset by the fact that his offer, his goodwill, was refused by Takua, and by the fact that his sons are now frozen in ice. Yet even then, he still seems slightly reluctant to release the Rakshi, justifying it by saying he's now out of options. His offer was refused, but he ends the dialogue by stating, "They will not disturb you," which is some weird wording considering how selfish Makuta actually is. It seems like something like, "They will not take you away from me," or "They will not stop my plan," seems more appropriate. Yet Makuta chose the words, "disturb you," which kinda gives this weird impression that Makuta is thinking of Matanui's feelings over his own.
So, it has begun, my brother. But soon, it will also end.
Makuta's monologues throughout the film are presented as if he's in a conversation with Matanui himself, as if he's keeping Matanui up to date on current events or something, but that doesn't seem like something Makuta would do. He's always had this one-dimensional persona of what a villain is. He's just out for power and doesn't care or empathize with others. But this dialogue is presenting us a different side of Makuta that we haven't really explored before. This Makuta shows a sense of reluctance, a sense of empathy, and an odd sense of care for his brother Matanui. So why then is he trying to stop the seventh Toa? Why why is he trying to keep Matanui asleep? Is it truly for power, or is there another motive?
I am Shadow. The shadow that guards the gate. Now run along, or accept your doom.
Once again, this is weird word choice. Guarding is synonymous with protecting. Why does Makuta feel the need to protect the gate? Surely there's more to this. Well, thankfully there is. Let's pay attention to this next scene very closely.
Well played, Toa. Now, I will protect Matanui from you.
Protect him?
Sleep spares him pain. Awake, he suffers.
Suddenly, everything is starting to make a bit more sense. Makuta is under the impression that he's helping Matanui by keeping him asleep, and this is supported by the dialogue he's had throughout the film. And while it does make sense that he could be lying to Takanuba to confuse him, it doesn't really make sense that he would have all these monologues with himself to Matanui or show such reluctance in releasing the Rakshi. But why would Makuta be under this impression, and what does this have to do with BIONICLE 2015? Well, Makuta's motives aren't the only plot elements that are dropped with this film. For example, once Takanuba emerges, there are continuous references that they are going to awaken the Great Spirit that day, which in context with the rest of BIONICLE lore makes absolutely no sense at all. So with that, we can kind of assume that the script for this film might have been written before those ideas were fully fleshed out. Which does make sense because we've been told in the past that LEGO typically plans their lines for 3 years unless they show to be popular, in which case they'll increase that. Now obviously this is BIONICLE from a very long time ago and that policy might not have existed back then, but if we are using that as a guide, then it makes sense that LEGO might be intending BIONICLE Mask of Light to be the first part of a finale, with the second part coming out in theaters the next year. Which is why in context of the film, Matanui being revived is the end goal. But since BIONICLE proved to be very successful, LEGO pushed that plot point back to 2008 rather than 2004. All of this meaning that Makuta's original purpose for putting Matanui to sleep was likely changed to accommodate a longer story, especially when considering his original role in the legend where he was actually Matanui's brother and not just Matanui's creation made to maintain the MU. But we're still avoiding the question as to what Makuta's goal was and what it has to do with 2015. So I'm going to stop talking and play that last clip from where we left off and hopefully put all of this to rest.
Sleep spares him pain. Awake, he suffers.
You! I'm not protecting him!
My duty is to the Mask of Shadows.
Then let's take a closer look behind that mask!
Whoa, wait a minute. What was that?
My duty is to the Mask of Shadows.
Duty is to the Mask of Shadows. Here's what we know. BIONICLE was most likely never intended to last 10 years, and it's likely that LEGO extended the line to accommodate for its popularity, during which it's likely that many elements or plot points were dropped, extended, or changed to go along with this. We know that BIONICLE 2015 is a callback to the roots of BIONICLE. The team has not hidden the fact that they've gone back and tried to establish those core elements that made BIONICLE work at the very beginning, making it clear that they're obviously taking inspiration from the early years of BIONICLE, and there's no reason to believe that they wouldn't expand on elements from the original line that never truly made it to the final product, thus leaving me with my final theory to propose. Perhaps Makuta's goal isn't to find the Mask of Power for his own volition. And perhaps he didn't attack the ancient city just to harass the protectors. And perhaps there's a reason he stayed in the ancient city guarding Akimu's body, protecting him from the evil villains descending from the sky. Because all the Makuta wants is to be recognized like his brother, to fulfill his duty to the Mask of Shadows, to the Mask of Ultimate Power, to become a hero, a savior, protecting his brother from living in a world of treachery and villainy, keeping him at rest in a deep slumber. Because awake, he suffers. The Makuta as he was originally written was a tragic hero. Someone who looked up to his brother Matanui but was never quite on the same level as him, always being second and never quite being recognized for his own achievements. A character with good intentions but lacking the strength and confidence of his brother, leaving his mind open to corruption and causing him to seek significance in less than moral means. And it's here that the Mask of Shadows and in turn the Mask of Ultimate Power is able to seize control and trick the Makuta, misguide and misdirect him into performing evil acts, thinking that he's doing it for the greater good, which is why when the Makuta merges with Takanuva, forming the Takuta Nuva, he's able to see past the shadows, with light guiding the way. And with a sudden sense of insight, of clarity, the Makuta can finally see right from wrong, and with the help of Takanuva, they awaken the Great Spirit, his brother, together. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Bionicle Autopsy. I'm Vardaran, and thanks for watching.